Thanks for coming. So I decided I thought the best thing to do tonight would just be to give you a kind of a whistle stop tour through Indian alchemy. So Rasa Shastra. So Rasa means many things, but in the context of this, it's Mercury, and then the Shastra is kind of knowledge or wisdom. So it's like an understanding of Mercury, the metal Mercury, because it forms the kind of the base or the underpinning of the system. It's considered the most auspicious material, and it finds its way into lots and lots of different formulas. In fact, if you go through a lot of your Ayurvedic pharmacopoeia, you just go through all the formulations, you'll see lots of different things pop up. So parad or lots of different names for mercury, but it'll appear in one form or another formulated in these medicines. So it's a very sort of, it's kind of there, but it's not spoken about, or it's not so understood. It's a sort of discipline within its own right a little bit, although we kind of treat it as kind of the Ayurvedic, under the Ayurvedic umbrella. It's its own separate discipline. It's sort of, I'm not quite sure where it emerged from, but an understanding of minerals, metals, gemstones, and then discovering sort of therapeutic value behind them. And also there's kind of two paths that you can follow. You know, so there's one branch of this science that is more dedicated to things like, elixirs of immortality, or, conversion of base metals, a bit like we all understand the word alchemy. We all kind of associate it with these kind of mad people locked away in little rooms trying to convert lead into gold. There's some of that behind the system as well. That's not something that I specialize in, or I'm afraid, sorry to let you down, I don't know how to make gold, so please don't ask me at the end. But it was considered as sort of it was like an early experimentation with minerals, metals, and gemstones, and just seeing what could be done. And from that, the fallout from those experimentations probably ended up in the sort of being formulated into medicines, just regular medicines, because, you know, they discovered by adding these to herbal formula, it kind of improved the power, a strong element of, a medicinal power to them. So what we'll do is I'll sort of just go through, I've prepared a sort of a short slideshow that just explains some of the basic concepts. And for those that aren't familiar, then, I just wanted to sort of go over the main points so we're all on the same page and you can sort of get a handle on what I'm talking about. So if I go ahead and share my screen. I've just recently updated the book. Rasa Shastra, the original version, came out in 2014. It looked quite a bit different. So this has undergone quite a facelift. In some respects, it's obviously the same book, but in other ways, it's quite different. I've managed to add a lot of extra stuff this time. It's been 10 years since I wrote the original book. So obviously I've moved on a lot. I've discovered a lot more. I've taken more photographs. I've experimented more. So all of those newer works and newer experiments and newer kind of analysis are all in this new book. So we've got a nice updated cover with Lord Shiva on there. So Shiva's a sort of the main deity we associate with Rasa Shastra. So it's been given a nice facelift. So as we go through, I'll sort of talk a little bit about what's changed in it. And I've got some slides from the book as well to show you. So we'll just sort of start basically with, what are the main differences between like Western alchemy and the Indian alchemy? The image to the left of the screen, that's actually, I just did an event somewhere. I literally just was, a friend of mine was attending a festival where he was doing bronze casting, and he just said, oh, why don't you come and make some medicines? It'll be fun for people to look and see what you're up to. So literally that's all you need. You just turn up, you dig a hole in the ground, you burn some wood, you get some pots and pestle and mortars, and you're off and everything. So it's all very accessible. It's very basic. It's very primitive. That's literally, that's not far off the amount of equipment that you would need to sort of start. Now, there are more specialist things that you can evolve into. Obviously, as you get hotter in temperature, then you have to have more sophisticated equipment. But it really doesn't get a lot more sophisticated than that. People are often quite amazed when they see you do it. It looks so primitive. It's like something out of the Stone Age, just literally pestle and mortars, powders, and a fire in the ground. And that's a lot of this science is quite can cope with that kind of level of sophistication. You can pretty much make at least 2/3 of the material just using this very basic equipment. Whereas the Western, on the other side of the screen, on the right side of the screen, it gets a lot more sophisticated. You're into kind of like distillations and like preparations of alcohol and, soaking stuff and kind of these advanced sort of forges, working with very, very high temperatures. Now, it's not to say that we don't use stuff like this in Rasa Shastra. This is a kind of this would be one of the sort of yantras that we would use something like this primarily to reclaim mercury, something like that, where you were evaporating and then distilling it. But that would be the kind of exception rather than the norm. So, it's just to say that that's principally the difference between the two. And of course, there's a material difference. The Western approach is kind of, got a sort of slightly different angle on it. And some of they favor more material. So like antimony is very popular in the Western alchemy, not so much so in the Rasa Shastra. So it's just to say that's kind of one primary difference is the amount of equipment that you need. So when I've done talks for groups, particularly Western alchemists, they're sort of horrified when you just pull out stone, pestle, and mortars and start a fire in the ground. They're all expecting something really, kind of awe-inspiring and complicated, but it's sort of super simple. In fact, even just using things like bellows just to produce the heat, you don't even need to have this kind of bellow arrangement, just a bag or literally just blowing down a pipe. There's lots of different ways to do it. So there is a component, as I said, about gold making. This is kind of so this is aurification. This is kind of making something that looks like gold. Some of the older alchemical books, they have, they'll give you these paths. They'll say, if you want to prepare gold, you need to do this and da, da, da. But if you're just looking to prepare something that looks like gold, you could possibly do it like this. So this was I think it was from a sort of like maybe a 14th, 15th century text. And it was just talking about how to make stuff that looked like silver and how to make stuff that looked like gold. And we ended up making something that looked like gold. It was quite good. I mean, obviously it's not gold, but it looked kind of golden. And it was bizarre, some of the techniques they were using. There were things in there where you were kind of melting, you were sort of melting lead, and then you were making sort of arsenical sort of rocks that were bound in human hair, and they were being dunked into lead, and you had to do that so many times, and then you had to incinerate that in a crucible, and then you had to add something, and it was quite a sort of insanely complicated process. And in the end, we ended up with something that looked pretty much like silver. So it was an interesting experiment. So when I get to the end, I'll give you the website link, and I've documented that all with movie, so you can go and have a look if you want to see. You want to see some fire and smoke and steam in action. So I did all my training. This is actually where I was working in Sri Lanka. This is my base of operations, right in the middle of the jungle. So it was a hell of a job to get there. It wasn't that far from the center of Colombo, but it was a terrible journey there by bus. By the time you get there, you're wrecked. It probably took about an hour and a half, 2 hours to get there and cross a river, and complete nightmare. But it was fun working there. It was secluded. This was taken during a monsoon. It didn't rain all the time. It was hot most of the time. I think we had a couple of torrential downpours. But basically, there were guys at this factory. This was a commercial factory making all Ayurvedic preparations. And I was on this side of the camera, sort of looking, if you imagine looking out, I was on the other side, looking in that direction. And I had a little sort of tent apparatus where they didn't bother me. They just let me get on with it and do my strange things all day. And I was kind of under instruction from a local Ayurvedic doctor, but she specialized in Rasa Shastra as well. So she would come and help me, and we'd prepare stuff together. And so it was kind of fun. I ended up being there almost a year. I'd spend most days doing stuff, grinding stuff. I mean, there's nothing else to do. So, it's 7 o'clock, it's dark. So you might as well just work all day, and you sweat and you work and you eat and you sweat, and that was it. And pretty much a year just whizzed by before I knew it. So I was amazed how much I was able to do in the time, which is great. And the story's documented in much more detail in the book. There's a kind of a mythological element, and I've covered this in the book quite a bit as well. This is from a story, a sort of a mythological story, Saga Manthan. So it's like the churning of the Milky Oceans. It's nothing really to do with Rasa Shastra, but it illustrates they already had an alchemical component to the story. So the idea here was that on the right here, you can see these guys in red. These are all the demons. These are the devas, and the blue are the demons on this side on the left. And the idea is they were constantly at war with each other, and they decided, well, we keep just wiping each other out. Wouldn't it be good if we could just live forever? So they decided to work together to look for Amrita. If they could find the sort of nectar of immortality, they'd never die. They'd be sort of immortal. So to do this, they had to churn the ocean to bring up the nectar. It was sort of under the milky ocean. So what they did was they collaborated, and they did this by, there's a big serpent here. It's a little bit difficult to see, but there's a purple sort of serpent here that goes across and around. So the devas, or the gods, took hold of the tail, the demons took hold of the head, and they began to move it backwards and forwards. And this serpent was wrapped around a mountain, and it sort of churned the water. And the first thing that came out was this toxic black material, this hala, this sort of great poisonous, whoever smelt it, or the vapors are horrific, just really, really toxic. And it was interesting because that's one of the processes that we first encounter when we begin to purify or work with different materials. Quite often there's an element of toxin or poison that's released, and that's the first thing that comes up. And weirdly, milk is one good thing to do that. So, for instance, if you want to determine whether the purity of certain things, if you bathe them in milk and you get a reaction, the milk will quite often, you'll see like a curdling or a discoloration or something like that. So, all elements of alchemical procedures are kind of in these stories, although they're not specifically alchemical, but that it's something to do with healing, because one of the first things that comes out of the ocean after this churning, apart from the poison, was the god of Ayurveda. He sort of appears, and the moon comes out, and there's a sort of a jewel and a wish-fulfilling tree, all kind of amazing things that come. But first, poison has to come. And I think this is quite good because it illustrates the whole kind of concept in Rasa, is that poison and nectar are the same thing. They're just opposites. It's the same, two faces of the one coin. So very toxic, purified correctly, can be super sort of nectarized. It can release great healing potential. And that's, if you think about it, a lot of the materials that are used in alchemy, things like the like ores, you've got like the arsenical metals or metal ores, and then you've got like antimonies and obviously mercury, and all these kind of things are pretty toxic, but treated correctly, they release their kind of nectar, or their divine kind of quality, their sort of ability to regenerate the body. It's just how we treat them and how we approach them. This is peacock ore. I think the reason I put this here was I forgot to mention in this story here that when the poison appeared, Shiva was the first god to sort of step forward and sort of sacrifice himself or clean up operation. He kind of sucked up all of this poison and he held it in his throat, just so that everybody else would be saved. But somehow he was able to transmute the poison, again alchemically, but transmute this poison into nectar. But what wasn't digested or transmuted, he spat out, and it was this rock, the shashaka, this bluish rock. So we say sort of peacock ore is, or like blue copper salts, that sort of blue, peacock blue color. So typically, any kind of blue in Rasa, if you see any metals that have got a blue tinge, or while you're processing, you see a blue quality, it's usually that there's some kind of poison element in it. That's, so it means it's super, it could be processed and made super powerful and super nectarized, but at the same time, it would be highly toxic as well. So even things like peacock feathers have got that sort of bluey color in them. So they're seen as having sort of a copper element. It was intuited that they sort of contain something a bit coppery, but if it's purified and done correctly, then it becomes like a highly nectarized form of medicine as well. So I just wanted to show that. It's actually it's not really a true, I think it's basically a copper pyrite that's been heated to some degree, or during the mining process, it's been subjected to a little bit of heat. And you find if you cook those coppery ores, they immediately go those sort of blue colors. So just to sort of just to show that it's quite an interesting material. And then of course there's the other side of Rasa, which is like, it's very into its poison. So we divide poison into sort of Visha, or like Upavisha and Visha, the two types. So very, very poisonous and quite poisonous. So that the sort of very poisonous is the top of the king of poisons, aconite. But then you have like snake venom, scorpion poisons, stuff off rabid dogs, the dripping fangs, and all kinds of these sort of weird and wonderful poisons that are mentioned. And again, a lot of those could have some medicinal benefit. Although I should say that's really a part that's not used so much now, obviously for obvious reasons. But what happens a lot is those sorts of poisons are used to then process other poisonous materials. So it's like poison and poison together creates nectar. So so things like like snake venoms and animal venoms, aconite, all these poisons, when they're mixed, or they actually quite like Navavisha, the nine, you have 9 really potent poisons. And if it's mixed with mercury, it helps reduce or relieve mercury of its sort of biggest toxic components. So again, you're kind of using, it's not opposites, it's like the same quality being added to sort of create an effect and remove the toxic element. So then you've got, sticking with our kind of mythological theme, you've got like the stories of these ancient alchemists, and now I've covered it in the book a little bit. This is Nagarjuna. So Nagarjuna is a difficult one because there's kind of a few of them, and when it's kind of portrayed that it's the same guy sort of moving from century to century who's immortal. But also we know that some of these texts that are attributed to him were later authors just using the same name. So it gets difficult to separate out who they all are, but the theme is kind of the same. There's a gold making element all the time, the ability to kind of make rain, be able to do magical feats, and I put this in purely because he's kind of an early inspirational figure for me, and because of Sri Lanka and its Buddhism connection. Nagarjuna comes up a lot. You see him in all the factories. But I know, of course, it's normally Shiva in all the Rasa pharmacies, but they have like Nagarjuna there as well. He's considered another demigod sort of thing, So I thought it would be good to include him in the story here. So you have him sitting on his coiled serpents in meditation. He has his various yantras around him. These are sort of various yantras that are used to cook and extract different ores. Wrapped bottles, which would be cooked. You cooked different minerals inside these wrapped bottles and collect the fumes or burn the fumes off and really retain the solids. And there's a little bit of cinnabar there and some sulfur in his various pestle and mortars. And this guy here is the Naga, one of the Naga folk. So these are the sort of the snake, like the half snake people. And the idea was that they kind of, he was excelled so much as an alchemist, they kind of took him into their fold and invited him to Patali, this underground world where all the snake king lived, and Nagarjuna lived there for a long time, and he became like a real friend, and they sort of gave him even more secrets, and they were a bit, begrudged to see him go, but eventually he returned to the sort of human world. But he brought all these kind of texts back with him to do all these amazing alchemical things. But the kind of codex or the key that unlocked those books was the last book, and the Nagas they wouldn't let him have it. So he kind of had the text, but he didn't have the codex to unlock it. So he had to go back to the Naga realm. It was like a key to get him to go back and, study with them again. So I thought an interesting character, and that's what I wanted to put him in the book as well. So there's an example of milk. That's actually some zinc that was being purified, and I purposely did it wrong. So what happens is with zinc, it's a later metal. It doesn't appear until much later, but there are quite a lot of texts which deal with its collection, how they would have the ore, they would collect the ore and it would go in sort of upturned vessels, and they would bring heat upon it, not direct heat, and then the ore would liquefy because at certain temperatures it just oxidizes. So the Indians are generally credited with sort of the first good or wholesale extraction of zinc. And to purify it, it's literally melted, and once you've extracted it, you've got the metal, it's liquefied, and then it's continuously re-liquefied and then poured into usually like buttermilk, or you can use nigundi decoction with some turmeric in it. There are many different ways to do it. It depends on where you're from and which method you favor. But what I did was I didn't do it the prescribed amount of time. So it should be done 21 times. 21 is the magical number. So you have to do it 21. 20 is no good and 22 is too much. So it must be 21. But I think I ended up doing it like 6 times just to prove a point. And when I went to do the milk test at the end, you kind of bathe it in milk at the end to just see how it settles in the milk. It immediately produced this weird sort of black paste that discolored all the milk. I ended up with like this silvery stuff all over the water, just horrific. So the milk had detected that whatever the processing was, it wasn't complete. It was half done. So it was a good example. And I use this photograph to show students, just that they can see it's a great way to test things. If you're never quite sure about the toxicity of something, it can be bathed in milk and just see if you get any kind of reaction. So that was a sort of prime example, that one. The pestle and mortar is a big part of it. It's probably the most used piece of equipment. They love these sort of boat-shaped ones. They're actually very good for. They're just literally just backwards and forwards motion. There's no kind of, obviously we like all our sort of circular ones in the West. They love these long stroke ones. It's actually less tiring to use these because you can kind of sit and you can get your full weight on it and just grind backwards and forwards. So I love using these, and there was lots and lots of them in the pharmacy, all different sort of materials. Some were granite, some were porcelain, some were kind of a like an agate, like a sort of a quartzy sort of material. Lots of different styles, and they're all for different things. They have different qualities. So when I came back, I was a bit miffed that I couldn't get access to one of these, and they're hellishly expensive to import from India. So I've got a local stonemason college near where I live, and I just dropped in there one lunchtime just on the off chance, and I said to the teacher there, would one of your students like to make me one just for a bit of indulgence? I'll obviously pay him, but I'd quite like one of these mortars. And they were always looking for things to make, kind of thing. And he said, I don't think anyone here would be interested in making it, he said, because they've all got projects. But he said, why don't you make it? And I said, well, I don't know anything about how to make stuff out of stone. And he said, oh, that's all right. He said, just pop in every Friday for a couple of hours and I'll show you what to do. So that ended up being my project for about 10 or 12 weeks. I used to go there every Friday and sit there with and surprisingly, I didn't screw it up. It actually worked. So I actually made this. I was quite pleased with it. So I cheated a little bit. I used a grinder in places. It's not all hand done, but sort of 60-70% of it's done with a chisel. But it gave me a great appreciation of how to how these things were made, and how to work with tools, and watching the other guys there making these amazing things out of stone. You just realize what can be done, how amazing it can be. I mean, obviously my skills are like just terrible, but I mean, just looking at some of the other people there, how good they were able to do it. It also included, there was a section about poisonous plants in the original book, but I didn't really go into a lot of detail about it, purely because I didn't get that much exposure to it while I was in Sri Lanka. But they used it a little bit. I did some, but not a huge amount. So I've expanded this section much more, been working with like aconite, and that's flame lily. Yeah, I've really got to appreciate how good these things are. I mean, they're incredible. Having said that, I should preface this. Well, these are, particularly aconite's highly toxic. So I'm not endorsing anyone go and do this, but I just, for my own personal interest. So I was able to kind of prepare. So usually to detoxify, the root is usually harvested in the spring, sometimes the autumn. It depends on the tradition. The Chinese kind of more in the spring, Ayurveda perhaps more in the autumn. And then you get the mother root and the daughter root, so they have different properties as well. And then you soak it. It will be soaked in a mixture of rock salt and mustard seed oil. So you leave it in there for 2 seasons, or two Indian seasons, if you like. So you give that a good soak in there. It's removed, washed, dried, and then it's boiled in cow urine or milk, something like that. Maybe 3 hours, not like a rolling boil, just a gentle boil. I personally prefer the cow urine to the milk. It's much easier to clean the root afterwards. But you'll find cow urine's it's an indispensable medium in Rasa Shastra. It's used in so many things. It has so many wonderful properties. You can evaporate it and collect the salts from it. You can purify metals in it, particularly iron loves being immersed or washed in cow urine. Just everything really, that all products of the cow are used and highly beneficial, and they crop up again and again. So I've expanded that section about the use of aconite. It's usually, nearly always formulated mixed with black pepper or black pepper long pepper, or it's licorice and ginger. And the antidote, ginger juice. So if you get any kind of toxicity, like ginger juice is one of the antidotes. So quite often the thing you purify, or you do the shodhana, this perfecting of these materials, that same material can be used as an antidote as well, or because it has the same properties in the body if you were to get any kind of signs of toxicity. The flame lily is a bit of a weird one. I didn't really, although I saw it growing over there, I never really used it much. But since I got back, I got really amazed and interested in this plant. There are lots of new developments that have come up. It's been growing a lot in South Africa now, and they're finding it's got lots of carcinogenic properties. It's got all kinds of amazing potentials. It's causes blood to flow and disperse. If you get inflammation, it's good at, it's sort of got a heating quality, but it disperses heat as well. So I've been using it mostly in things like Nagundi oil. So that's a sort of Ayurvedic oil that's very good for sort of massage, usually good like joint pains and stuff like that. But I found it's like any kind of like skin ailment, the root dried, powdered, and then decocted, and then that's mixed into the various ingredients in the Nagundi oil. Incredible. So I haven't found it. I haven't found a skin condition that isn't good for you. With like athlete's foot or sort of pimples or anything. It has a really sort of drying quality. Just takes all the heat out of it. So it's like really incredible. So they call it Rakta Pushpa. So it's like the sort of the blood, like the blood plant. So they already knew that there was a connection between this plant and the blood. So I've done a whole number on Langali, it's called in Ayurveda. So and of course Datura. This is the blackcurrant Datura, blackcurrant swirl, I think is the English name. But the sort of Krishna Datura, the sort of darker ones. So again, the seeds on this mainly used. There's a sort of seed extraction process with heat, but that's then put into oils. It's just used externally. This one, it's not used. Well, I mean, there are cases when it does appear in formula, but it's mostly for a topical application. But again, what a beautiful plant. Nothing quite like it. The smell is incredible. And on that sort of night of the moon, under sort of like a full moon where they all sort of pop, all the flowers just appear overnight from nowhere, and they've got this amazing smell. It's like super intoxicating. So incredible plant. These lovely sort of long trumpets. Ghee, another cow product. It says clarified butter. And then it's kind of you mix it back, you put milk back with it again to add a sort of an extra cooling effect to it. And then you can decoct your herbs into it. And then basically you're liquefying ghee, you're adding milk, so you're getting up this watery, milky ghee again. And you're adding the liquid decoctions, and then you just cook it off for 5, 6, 7 hours, very, very low flame. The lower the flame, the better. And then you just basically, all of the solids are sinking and they come like a calco, like it's paste, like black paste, and the ghee rises and then it's just filtered off. And you get sort of, this is a bit of an exaggerated, because it's got some turmeric in this as well. So it's becomes a little bit extra yellow, but that's highly useful as well. That's just some aconite roots. That's just kind of straight from the marketplace in India. It's kind of a mix of roots. You never know a mix of roots could be anything. I mean, it's probably all aconite, but there are like 100 different varieties of aconite. So probably some of them aren't even toxic in there. That's Pravala. So this is ground coral. So there's another big tradition, the Pishtis. This is probably more like a Arabian, Arabic kind of influence. Pishti just means very fine powder. So literally just grinding gemstones down to a very fine powder in rose water. And then they're taken singly, or they can be formulated. But the idea is in rose water, they're very cooling. Coral is like to do with the heart, the blood, repairs like damaged cartilage and kind of muscle, sinew damage, that kind of thing. And it relates to heart as well. It's kind of like a Martian remedy. So any of the things that I basically to do with the Jyotish, to do with the astrological symbolism. So you look at Mars and see what Mars was good for, and then red coral would be a kind of an antidote for that, so kind of excess pitta and stuff like that. But the idea of grounding it in the rose water, you're infusing it with the quality of the rose, which is again sort of cooling and associated with the heart. So it's like a vehicle, like the Anapana for these medicines. It helps them reach their organs that they're designed to be targeted towards. So it's just a lot of grinding on that, literally just getting nice coral, washing it, cleaning it, and then you're like sort of 20, 30 hours. It has to be completely free of grit. So if you put powder in your mouth and try it and it still feels gritty, it's no good. It should just be like talcum powder. There should be no scratchiness at all. So it's quite a thing doing it, particularly if you get hard stones as well. Once you get into the sort of the like cat's eyes, garnets, all those are quite, it's like 7 or 8 on the hardness scale. So it's takes quite a bit of grinding. But with a granite mortar, like 20 or 30 hours. The great thing about Pishtis is you can never overdo it. You can always grind it for longer. And to get extra qualities, you can do Chandra Putta. So you put it under the moon at night, under the full moon, or you can pick a nakshatra, one of the moon's various 27 lunar mansions. If there's a particular mansion you wanted to, or deity associated with that mansion, if you wanted to empower your medicine with that, you could select that as a dry it under there as well. So there's all kinds of extra, a lot of mythological stuff that can be added. That's the primary heat source that we use. This is dry cow dung. So in India they'll just collect the cow dungs and sort of shape them a little bit, stick them on the wall, and when they're dry they'll fall off. it's difficult over here because our environment's so damp and wet. So generally, I tend to mix them with a little bit of sawdust. What I learned was that it doesn't really matter how many you've got how many cow dungs you burn. The temperature, maximum temperature, is always about the same. It's about 900 degrees. It's just how quickly it rises to that temperature, how long it's sustained at that temperature, and how quickly it cools off. That's what varies with the different sizes of oven. So, they have a big hole in the ground full of cow dung, that's a mahaputta. If you have a tiny little hole in the ground with a few, that's kapota putta. It's like the different size pits and different size quantities for different jobs. So if you've got a sensitive material that needs high temperature but not sustained high temperature, you would use a smaller pit, still get high temperature, but it would dissipate quickly. Whereas if you're doing something like a highly resistant material like mica, which takes lots and lots of cooks and very high temperature, then you need a big mahaputta to really sustain that top temperature as long as possible. So it really helps break down these materials into bhashmas, these ashes, these medicinal ashes. That's a kind of more modern approach. I've been working with this a lot more now. It's just kind of doing crucibles. I mean, this one's using coke, but I tend to use charcoal now. It's just much better for Western, for our environment. I mean, we just don't get the weather over here. We don't have the luxury of being able to burn things in open fields. And, it's in India, it's a bit different. Everyone's burning cow dung, so it's fine. But over here, nobody wants to be next to somebody burning cow dung. So a little bit of charcoal and these crucibles with closed lids really simulate putta well, and they're very, very clean. You don't get any smoke. It's very clean and quick. So this is something I've kind of migrated to. And then interestingly, the Unani equivalents of the Ayurvedic, they have their own tradition, the same kind of. So Unani is like the Greco-Arabic tradition of very similar to Ayurveda. So they have like kushtas. So the kushta just means like to kill. So it's things that have been killed and then can't be resurrected. So it's the same idea. They're burning materials down to these oxides and then they're formulating them. So they use a lot of crucibles. Their technology of heat and crucibles is quite good. And, it's often quite much quicker to produce, and you don't lose potency. So that's been an interesting, I've covered this in the book as well. I've spoken about the different types of crucibles in the ovens and how they compare, and there's a heat graphs in there that show you the differences between them as well. That's kind of like what you're looking at internally. So you've kind of got a closed crucible inside this putta. The materials spread out on the inside. You use clay pots sealed with mud and cloth, and they'll easily withstand like 1,000 degrees. You don't often get breaks, but the material will get pretty well cooked in there. But it's a 24-hour process. By the time you've prepared your cow dung, it's dry, you've put your pot in the ground, you put cow dung on top of it and underneath it, you've allowed it to burn down, you've allowed the heat to dissipate, you recovered it the next day. So it's a sort of 24-hour process, whereas the crucible method, you could be finished in 25, 30 minutes and attain the same thing. So you see the advantage of different techniques. Just got some sections here from the book. I just want to show a few bits. I've got some really good pictures actually. So this is the peacock ore. This is just out of interest. One of the books speaks about copper extraction from peacock ore. So I was just I followed the method just to see whether it worked. And I did actually get something that looked kind of gold and coppery. It's this little bit here, like a little bit here. And this turns sort of coppery color. I haven't got around to sending it to the lab to get it analyzed. I don't think for a minute it's copper. It's probably a kind of a material reaction from fumes. The method to extract the copper requires lots of ingredients. You've got like borax, you've got ghee, you've got honey. They're all mixed together in this kind of paste. There's gugaloo in there as well. And the idea is that it extracts the sattva, the pure quality of the material. So the idea is, if you cook the peacock feathers with this, it's called panchamitrika, so like 5 friends. So it will pull the copper out of it. And I did actually get something that looked like copper, so I was quite pleased with that. So, and there's a sort of an explanation about how that was prepared. And then I've got the sort of, tables and tables of everything you need to know, kind of chemical breakdowns, what they're used for. So it's a great sort of reference for if you want to know more about materials and how they might be used, and the kind of processes behind them, and the sort of the main categorizations, how they differentiate. They had a sort of an early like periodic table developed separating out into like metals, gemstones, primary metals, secondary metals, primary gemstones, secondary gemstones, toxic plants and not so toxic. All these things were separated out into categories. So I made a bit more. I spent a lot of time actually re-going through all these tables and just making it a bit clearer, so it's easier to follow. And there's a section on copper. I mean, you can see, look at the wonderful colors you get when you're kind of cooking copper. You get all kinds of weird. This is poured into buttermilk. So you use the buttermilk to purify, but also give you telltale signs of any toxicity as well. So this was actually plumbing pipe originally, the copper. So obviously there are other things in there. You got some nickel and some other contaminants, some lead, and all those things are brought out with the processing. So probably that's why I was getting such a color change. But as I went on and the processing got deeper, it just looked like copper. It basically didn't discolor anymore. So I would take that as a sign that the purification was working well. And if you want to see loads of videos on this, if you're kind of interested in seeing sort of real hands-on stuff, I've got my channel, my Natira Alchemy. So aside from having loads of interviews on there lately, I've sort of got into interviewing people. So you can skip through all that, but there's loads of other videos on there of how to do a lot of these preparations. So feel free to have a look at that. Some of the videos are quite good. I mean, not blowing my own trumpet, but some of the people I interviewed are very interesting. I'm probably not so interesting, but they were interesting. So I've got a guy on there who's talking about Vedic palmistry, and I got an interview with James Braha. He does the Jyotish, that's the Ayurvedic astrology. And then we got this Douglas DeBecker, he's an expert in Tibetan medicine. Jonathan Edwards, he does Chinese medicine and Ayurveda. So they're kind of interviews with them asking about their life and their story. So feel free to go on there, and they're all free. So if you fancy sort of catching up, they've got some interesting characters on there. So feel free to explore those. And that's my main website, natirapublishing.com. And if you want to contact me, info@natirapublishing.com. And I'd highly recommend. I'm really pleased with the book. I mean, I know I'm going to say that, but I am really pleased with it. The first book, the first version, although I liked it, it was a great book and it was my first book, because the publishers were more orientated towards TCM. So it definitely had like a more of a Chinese sort of feel to it, even though it was like an Ayurveda book that looked like it was something to do with TCM, just because that was a kind of orientation of that publisher. But AEON's been really good. They kind of let me have full reign on it, just let rip, really. So I was able to do a lot of things that I wasn't allowed to do on the first one. And although there's a lot that's in the first one that isn't this one, like there was a big section on astrology in there originally, that's now gone, but it's been replaced with more alchemy stuff, because that's kind of what I really wanted to expand on this. But yeah, I got my copies like a week ago. I was really blown away how good they were, like really nicely made hardback, weighs a ton. And the picture quality was superb. I was really because you're always a bit nervous, aren't you, when you send photographs in how they're going to reproduce, but they'd actually done a really good job. So I was really happy with that.